Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes here for everyone to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, for those of you who just logged in, we're going to give this exactly 2 more minutes for more people to join, and then we'll be getting started. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jerry Prochaska, for those of you who don't know me. The topic that we're doing today with Joyce, we actually came up with this as a topic for our conference, and it was by far one of the most popular sessions that we had. We had done a survey to campus leaders across the country, and mental health came up as the #1 topic that people were working on finding a solution for. So I had reached out to Joyce, who did an absolutely fabulous job, and we decided that the topic was far too important to only share with those people that were at our conference. So we decided to open this up so we could put it on our website so that you and other people in our sector would be able to have it in the future. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce Joyce. Joyce Martyr is a licensed psychotherapist with 25 years of experience and an entrepreneur who founded Urban Balance, an outpatient mental health company with 17 locations in 6 states. Martyr is an adjunct professor at Northwestern University, a national keynote speaker, blogger for Psychology Today, and a mental health thought leader specializing in the psychology of money. Joyce Martyr is routinely consulted as a mental health expert in the media, featured in such outlets as U.S. News and World Report, The Wall Street Journal, CNN, and MTV. Her book, The Financial Mindset Fix, a mental fitness program for an abundant life, was released by Sounds True in July of 2021 and has been featured in the Business Insider, Money Geek, US Weekly, Thrive Global, Forbes, and more. And with that, I'm going to turn you over to Joyce, and I promise you're going to enjoy this.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for the kind introduction. And hi, everyone. I'm really honored and excited to be with you. And I hope that you find this presentation inspiring and informative, and you'll receive a bunch of tools and techniques to bring back to your audiences. So my screen just kind of changed here. Are you still seeing my slides? If somebody could let me know, Jerry, are you still seeing my slides up there?
I'm still seeing your slides.
Okay, fantastic. Suddenly my second monitor is a humongous video of me. So I'm talking to myself right now. Anyway, I am so thankful to you all for recognizing the importance of mental health, especially during these challenging times. Even prior to the pandemic, we were in a world mental health epidemic, with the rates of anxiety and depression and suicide at an all-time high. And of course, our country had already been dealing with the opioid epidemic, and the pandemic is a global trauma. And we cannot process what's been going on over the past year and a half like we do usual life experiences, because it's too much, it's too overwhelming. Life has changed on so many different levels, and that impacts us mind, body, and spirit. And there are normal mental health implications. I am a passionate mental health advocate. I strongly believe that we all have mental health just like we have physical health. We are predispositioned to respond to stress with depression, anxiety, relationship issues, or addiction. And that's a normal aspect of the human condition. I'm really passionate about destigmatizing mental health and removing shame and stigma. I view counseling or therapy as something healthy and proactive, like seeing the doctor or a personal trainer or the dentist, and it should be a routine and preventative form of healthcare, really, for each of us. I think we can all benefit from it at different points in our lives. When I started graduate school, I was really concerned that my professors at Northwestern were going to see that I deal with an anxiety disorder, and that they'd be like, you can't be a therapist, you have issues. But thankfully, I don't know if you know this, all therapists have issues because we're human. And so most of us came into the field because of earlier life experiences that compelled us to want to be of service to others. And so definitely want to illuminate you on mental health and how you can help your staff and your students and their families and your communities. So you can think about this presentation for both the workplace and also for your own, personal family and personal self. So I am sharing in the chat a link that you can also access with this QR code. And it's a link to a landing page on my website where I share copies of these slides, as well as some useful articles and other resources that you can bring back to your places of work and share with your colleagues and utilize in your mental wellness programming. So hopefully you accessed that correctly. I'll share with you what that looks like. So once you're on there, you may have to enter your email address. You will end up at this landing page, and you can click here to download the slides. I have a lot of links on my slides that go to other articles and resources, so it's great that you'll have those slides. I have a list of common mental health signs and symptoms, great to send out to your faculty so that they can have these top of mind. Some other resources for supervisors and leaders. I have a video where I did a TV segment on how to recommend counseling to someone. I know that that can sometimes feel really awkward, and we're going to talk about that today, how to do that, but you've got that video at your fingertips if you need it for anybody. I'm as mentioned, I blog for Psychology Today, so I try to write some helpful articles, and then I have a link to my new book, which I'm really excited about, and is also a really great resource with lots of activities for staff and students. So these are our objectives today, and while I talk through those, I would really like to launch a poll. And I want to hear from you. What do you most want to get out of today's presentation? And that's going to help me kind of gear what I spend more or less time talking about. So today, some of our objectives are mental health awareness, understanding the impact of behavioral health issues on the workplace. Behavioral health includes both mental health and substance abuse and addiction, which really are kind of chicken and egg and very much interrelated. You're going to learn about what mental health first aid is, and how to talk to people and facilitate referrals. I'm going to talk about mindfulness programming, which has become extremely popular in the workplace and might be something that you'd like to consider. And I'm going to provide resources for ongoing programming. So it's been a while since I have done, I see that we're collecting responses. I'm going to give this a few more minutes because people are still responding to that poll, which I really appreciate. So as I mentioned, even before the pandemic, we were under stress in the United States. These statistics are from the American Psychological Association from 2019. And this was, before the pandemic. And 61% of people were reporting workplace stress. 77% reported physical signs caused by stress. 73 reported psychological symptoms caused by stress. 33% said they were living with extreme stress, and nearly half of us said that our stress had increased over the past 5 years. So what do you think things look like today? I imagine that this has exacerbated greatly. In my clinical practice, I see that people are really stressed out. I do hope that it's the silver lining, however, of the pandemic, that so many people are experiencing stress and mental health symptoms, that it's promoting mental health awareness, and people are willing to have more vulnerable and honest conversations about mental health. And hopefully that will promote access to care. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results. You guys did a fantastic job of completing that poll. And I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results. So it looks like you really want to cover all of these topics. So that's fantastic. How to recognize mental health conditions in the workplace is important. And that safe culture really is an important thing, especially for the younger generations, the Gen Zs and the millennials. That is really an important aspect of morale in the workplace. Knowing that it's a psychologically safe and comfortable place for people to be able to talk to their supervisors and managers about what they're dealing with and receive support and resources. So thank you so much for sharing that. So with the stress epidemic, as I mentioned, the pandemic has increased those stressors. And as I move through this list, I'd really like you to honor and thank yourself for helping yourself and your loved ones move through the so many challenges of the pandemic, and really honor and reflect what this has been like for you, what it's been like for your staff and your students. We have been dealing with serious concerns for our health and safety of ourselves and our loved ones for over 18 months, and that's an enormous stressor. I'm going to look here. I didn't include that in my polls, but when I share these polls with people asking what some of the greatest stressors have been, the health and safety concerns definitely have been number one for folks. Then we've had a lot of adjustment. People working remotely or learning remotely, teaching remotely, or perhaps adjusting to being back in the workplace. And with that comes safety protocols and different ways of working. And if there's anything I've learned as a therapist for 25 years now, it's that as human beings, we have difficulty with change, transition, and uncertainty, because it requires us to pivot and shift gears and adapt, and that takes some psychological energy. Many of us have been sheltering in place with loved ones. So if you have been working remotely, you may be working at home with your partner or your roommate or your kids. I have 16 and 19-year-old daughters and a 22-year-old stepson. And for a minute there, 5 of us were living and working in our home with 2 dogs, and it was a lot of togetherness. We ended up getting our 22-year-old an apartment. We thought that was a really good idea. It was less expensive than an addition on our home. So people have had a lot of togetherness, and that has led to an increase in relationship conflict. If you are a person who lives alone, or if you have staff or students that are in that situation, loneliness and isolation is an extreme mental health challenge that can really exacerbate depression and anxiety and other mental health issues. Dependent care, the research is showing that a lot of young adult children have moved home due to differences in college plans or unemployment or financial stress within the family. People are moving in together to save money. Some industries have been really hard hit, and some family businesses have had to close and things like that. Many people also have taken in their elderly loved ones to care for them if they're at high risk in the communities that they had been living in previously. And obviously many people have been dealing with the challenges of having kids at home, doing virtual learning. I had a high schooler learning at home for 1.5 years of high school. So, lots of loss and lots of transition. So the way mental health works, the higher our stressors, the more self-care and the more social support we need. And the research is showing that people are actually working more during the pandemic, not less, and having less time for self-care. And we're not seeing our friends and family and loved ones in the ways that we usually do. Now with the vaccinations, maybe we're able to do more of that, but it's still a bit different. And so less social support has been a real mental health challenge. Many people have been feeling feelings of fear and stress financially. So I actually, one of the aspects of the book that I just wrote that just came out is the interconnection between financial stress and mental health issues. And again, it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. And I discovered in my practice that as you work on your mental health and you develop those positive mental health skills, it's actually going to help you in your career and in your profession and in your relationship with money. But definitely COVID has caused both a mental health and financial health crisis. We are living during a time where, importantly, systemic racism has come to the forefront, and it's super important, and changes need to be made. But it's re-traumatizing for many folks. And we've been living during a time of political divide and unrest. And so even within families or within communities, or perhaps even in your classrooms, my husband teaches for Northwestern online, and he's had students get in arguments in the classroom about, vaccination versus no vaccination, or masks versus no masks. And these are very challenging topics because our country right now is in such a state of political divide. And so it's easy for those conversations to lead to tension and conflict and toxicity in your learning environment or workplace. Challenges managing uncertainty and change. I mean, we just, I think many of us felt like things were really improving, and then the Delta variant has come about, and there's still uncertainty. And so it's a chronic state of stress that we've been living in for quite some time. I give corporate trainings and trainings for therapists across the country, and some attendees are even global. And people are reporting a lot of health anxiety. So concerns about being back in the classroom or back in the workplace and being exposed to others who maybe aren't vaccinated, and different levels of comfort. For some people, they feel they're vaccinated, they feel comfortable not wearing a mask. Other people who may have compromised health issues, or loved ones with compromised health issues, or loved ones who haven't been able to get vaccinated, may have much greater concerns. We're also noticing as mental health professionals that a lot of people are experiencing social anxiety. So we've all been kind of cocooned up for a year and a half, and now we're re-entering. And if you're anything like me, you may have you may feel a little rusty on your social skills. When I presented for C-SPAN, you were, I think, my second in-person presentation since the pandemic, and I felt a little rusty being around people and making small talk, and found myself either bizarrely overly friendly or strangely flat and not knowing how to respond. We're just out of practice being around other human beings. And the research has also shown that most of us have put on some pandemic pounds, and that people are feeling a lot of self-consciousness about being back at school and work when their bodies have changed. This is especially true for the older Gen Zs and younger millennials, who 60% gained undesired weight, and the average weight gain is 41 pounds, which is pretty staggering. I know my husband has had students share that they don't have clothes to wear back to their internships that fit and things like that. So just being compassionate and mindful that these are maybe some of the issues that your faculty and students are dealing with. Again, they may be dealing with dependent care and then figuring out how to manage that with school or work. And the ongoing financial stress as people are caring for loved ones who are unemployed. And workload is very, very high. There's just a tremendous amount of burnout that people are experiencing these days. The Great Resignation is happening. I'm not sure if you're experiencing that in your workplaces, but in April alone, over 4 million Americans resigned from their jobs. The belief is that people really have had time to reflect over the pandemic and have gotten clear about their work-life balance and their values, and some people are not comfortable returning back into the workplace, and so it's led to people resigning from their jobs. And there are certain industries, like the restaurant industry that my stepson works in, is extremely shorthanded, which leads to a lot of stress for those individuals working in those trades or positions. So we all respond to stress a little bit differently, and I want you to be aware of this in yourselves and in your loved ones and in your colleagues and students. For some of us, stress manifests physically. So headaches, migraines, stomach aches, gastrointestinal problems, muscle aches. Something that I'm hearing a lot in my speaking and practice is insomnia and sleep problems, which are actually results of trauma, which is an issue that we're all dealing with these days in some way or another. Some of us respond to stress emotionally. So it might you might find yourself more irritable, less patient, maybe even just apathetic, kind of emotionally stunted or blunted, and not finding joy in the things that you usually enjoy, not making time for your hobbies, just feeling kind of blah or numb. Those are emotional signs of stress. Cognitive signs of stress, and in your learning environments, you may really be seeing this in your students and also in your faculty. So we have experienced cognitive overload with all the news and all the shifting gears about COVID. And so our brains are like operating systems, and there's too many pages open and they're overloaded, and so our brains are glitching. So many people are experiencing memory problems, word retrieval problems, short-term memory problems, forgetfulness, easily being distracted, difficulty making decisions, difficulty finding your words and stringing them together. These are cognitive symptoms of stress and overwhelm. As I mentioned, the stressors of the pandemic are leading to relationship conflict. So sometimes when we're stressed out, we take it out on the ones that we love. And we also have conflict in the workplace. So I give a lot of presentations on effective communication and conflict resolution in the workplace, because that can happen a lot and it can lead to sort of toxic workplace environment and lower morale. It can also impact job or academic performance. So I know in many environments, teachers, my oldest is in college at Tulane right now, and my youngest is in high school, and their teachers are being a little bit more forgiving and allowing test retakes and things like that, because the kids are under a lot of stress. The research shows that kids 18 to 24 have been the greatest impacted in terms of a mental health perspective than any other age group. So really extra important for you to maybe not compare them to how you've responded or how you think you would have responded when you were their age, but just recognizing this really is an enormously challenging time for them during such an important phase of development. So we all know what stress is. Stress is anything that our minds or bodies experience as overwhelming, but burnout is a state of prolonged and chronic stress. I really believe that in some ways, each and everyone each of us is experiencing signs and symptoms of burnout. I want you to look at this slide and be honest with yourself and ask yourself, am I personally experiencing any of these signs and symptoms of burnout? Do I see them in my supervisees? Do I see them in my students or my loved ones? And this is something that we really need to address. I give a lot of presentations on promoting positive mental health and resilience, so giving people practical tools and tips to combat burnout and promote better well-being and self-care. I'm sorry, I'm getting like a little update here, and I think I can just ignore that. So, implication of burnout. This is really disturbing. The World Health Organization found that 785,000 Americans die every year from overwork and burnout. The research shows that people who work 55 hours a week or more are at greater risk of heart disease and stroke. So this is a really serious epidemic within our workplace culture. So are you an individual that works more than 55 hours a week? And is that healthy for you emotionally and physically, relationally? I'm a big believer in work-life balance. It's why I named my outpatient mental health company Urban Balance, because I believe you can love your work. I love my work. I'm very passionate about it. In many ways, it fills my cup. But if I don't set healthy boundaries with work, I'm going to become exhausted, depleted, burnt out, and resentful. So really learning how to set healthy limits between work and home and prioritize self-care and wellness. As I mentioned, the Great Resignation is happening. Many people are turning to self-employment. So you want to maintain your faculty and promote a positive workplace so that people feel safe and comfortable talking about mental health issues, and they feel supported at work. So what are the mental health implications of the pandemic? All of us in some way or other have experienced grief and loss. On a very minimal level, it's the loss of moving through our lives in the way that we normally do. When things were shut down, we weren't able to go into the workplace in the way that we normally do. We weren't able to go to our places of worship or our gyms or see our friends and family. You may have had canceled events or vacations. Weddings were postponed. I know my 19-year-old didn't have a prom or a graduation, which in the grand scheme of the pandemic is perhaps not such a big deal, but to an 18-year-old, that's a really freaking big deal, right? So honoring what people have lost on a much greater and more serious scale. Some people have lost many loved ones to COVID. I have 2 colleagues who are South Asian, and each of them has lost over 5 or 6 family members due to COVID. I have other friends and clients that have lost loved ones either to the virus or to something else during the pandemic, and they weren't able to have proper funerals or in-person experiences to help them grieve and get closure. So it's been a really hard time for people with a lot of loss and grief that they're experiencing. The research is showing that according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 65% of Americans are reporting symptoms of anxiety. So that's, like ruminating thoughts, feelings of overwhelm, feelings of panic or nervousness. Again, you can have physical symptoms of anxiety, difficulty sleeping, racing thoughts. And then 45% are reporting symptoms of depression. I think that a lot of lay people think of depression as when you feel very, very low and perhaps even suicidal, or if you're crying a lot. But I think a lot of people don't realize that depression can manifest as irritability and anger and a short fuse. So depression can manifest in different ways. There's something called dysthymia, which is kind of a low-grade chronic depression. And then some people experience major depression or major depressive disorder. I think it's also important to note that with the age group, perhaps of some of your students, it is common for the initial onset of a serious mental health condition to come about in the early to mid 20s, actually mid to late 20s. So disorders such as bipolar disorder, which have a strong genetic and biochemical family component, oftentimes people's first episodes are when they are college aged. So really important for your organizations to have some sort of counseling available to students or some resources available so that they can get screened and get the help that they need and deserve. During the pandemic, people are using substances more. More people are having more drinks at home. So checking in with yourself, are you having a few more glasses of wine to cope with the stress or the boredom or the anxiety of uncertainty? And reflecting on, is that healthy for you mentally or physically or relationally? And recognizing that this is an issue with your faculty and students. And I'm sure many of you work in industries that safety is a real issue, and having impaired professionals is a real issue. So making sure that you have screenings in place and drug-free workplace programming, especially now. And I live in Illinois, where marijuana has been legalized and many more people are partaking. So like I said before, there's a real relationship between mental health and physical health. So it's important to be mindful of that. I worked in employee assistance program work for 5 years as my full-time job, and I've been an EAP counselor contractually and presenter for 15 years or more. And in EAP, that's assessment, brief treatment, and referral for any mental health or addiction issue. I saw a lot of supervisors or managers were dealing with academic or job performance issues with a person and maybe not recognizing that they were impaired with a substance abuse issue. So really important to have that on your radar and have your staff trained to notice some of the signs and symptoms that I'm going to share with you today. The research has shown during the pandemic, there's an increase in relationship conflict. So if you're fighting with your boo, with your significant other, you are not alone. And there's been an increase in breakups and divorce. and even more concerningly in domestic violence and child abuse. So also having that on your radar, that you may not know what's going on in a student's home or a staff member's home. And these are issues that are very, very much on the rise that would impair and negatively impact their ability to be successful in their learning and in their work. I mentioned that the pandemic is a global trauma. So I think sometimes people think of trauma as something that only war veterans or people who've experienced horrible assaults like rape have experienced. But I would argue that most of us have experienced trauma. If you've been through a divorce or a breakup or an accident or a serious illness or injury, or if you've had an extreme financial loss like a foreclosure or unemployment, those are all various traumas. And the way that mental health works is our current traumas tap into our deeper, older traumas. So, like, for example, I had a client years ago that came to me after she was hit while she was crossing a crosswalk. A car hit her body. Physically, she was okay, but it triggered this whole trauma response in her, and she had undergone physical and sexual abuse per her father growing up. And it was like this car accident just unpacked all the stuff that she had kind of shoved away. And she had to take FMLA and take some time off of work so that she could get therapy and counseling and even some medication to help her kind of restabilize. And her workplace was enormously accommodating, gave her intermittent FMLA so that she could take days off when she wasn't feeling good, but could come into work when she was. And they changed some of her job responsibilities so they were a little less stressful for her, reducing her customer service with some data entry and things like that. So just recognizing that trauma is very forefront right now, and people who are essential workers are 75% more likely to be experiencing symptoms of PTSD. And if you've had COVID like I have, or you have loved ones who've had it, you're at higher risk for having trauma symptoms as well. We are at a 33-year high in suicide attempts. And with the pandemic, there has been an increase, and 16% of suicides are financially driven. So I'm not sure what that's like at your schools, whether it's, concerns about people paying their tuition or getting employment or whatever it might be, but having that on your radar is really, really important. I really like this mental health continuum because it illustrates, I think a lot of times when we talk about mental health, people think about mental illness, and they think about people who are in crisis or are really struggling. And they aren't thinking about mental health as being a continuum between being in crisis and really thriving and excelling. So you can actually promote your positive mental health and improve your life personally, professionally, financially, and relationally. So when I've given surveys across the country a few times a week to large audiences, I sometimes give a poll asking people, where do you think that you fall on this mental health continuum? And by and large, people are sharing that they fall between surviving and struggling, the vast majority. And it's been consistent across industries. So people are going through really a hard time right now. And I'm sure you all are too in different ways. I hope things are going well for you, but it's a hard time. And so recognizing that we're all under some distress, and as supervisors and leaders, there's less sort of room for you sometimes to take care of yourself, and you have the additional responsibility of taking care of your staff and the people who report to you. So according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, this is pre-pandemic data. 1 in 4 Americans experiences a serious mental health condition in a given year. 1 in 25 live with a serious mental health condition. 42 million people deal with anxiety. So you may have students that have panic attacks in the classroom or share that they're having anxiety on the job. This is a real issue. And the good news is treatment is available and effective. And 6% of people or 6 million people are dealing with bipolar disorder, which I don't think a lot of people realize that there's 3 different levels of bipolar disorder. And in your mind, you might think of the most severe, where people have, delusions of grandeur and these full-blown manic episodes. But there's also bipolar 2, which is a lesser form of kind of hypomanic states where people are sleeping less and they're maybe overworking and talking faster and just seem a little bit high or a little agitated. And then there's cyclothymia, which is a much more mild case of kind of mood swings back and forth between more depressive and more hypomanic. So, just recognizing that these are real issues that people experience. In my practice, I have had a number of people thank me profusely for helping them realize that they actually had a form of bipolar disorder after being treated for years for depression and not really feeling any better. So the medications are different, the treatment is different, and so it's important to get assessed. I would like you to have some awareness of some of the groups that are at higher risk, even of having mental health conditions, because they are already marginalized in our overall population. So racism has an enormous toll on mental health for a variety of reasons, including barriers to care, a lot of different issues. There's a mental health gap in terms of availability to get services. Individuals in the LGBTQIA+ population are also at higher risk of dealing with mental health issues. Basically, anybody who is in a marginalized group that it regularly is traumatized or experiences discrimination or bias, all of that is extremely stressful and makes it really difficult to develop a positive sense of self and to feel safe and empowered in the world. And so it's extra important for us to, as educators and business professionals, to have a compassionate multicultural lens and be advocates and allies for our colleagues and staff and students who may be persons of color or members of these communities. Early detection of mental illness is extremely important. We want to nip issues in the bud. So I must get asked 3 times a week, when do I know that I need to go to therapy? And my answer to that is just go. You don't need to wait until you're suffering to a certain level. Therapy can be preventative and proactive, like getting your teeth cleaned. So you can go and have an assessment and learn some new coping skills and new tools or ways of thinking of things that are going to help you continue to thrive and prosper. These are some of the early detection signs of mental illness, and this comes from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. On the landing page that I shared with you that has all of these resources, you can print out a PDF or you can email that to your staff with a longer list of some of these signs and symptoms. So excessive worry or fear, that would be a sign or symptom of anxiety. Excessive sadness or low might be depression. Confused thinking, concentrating, or learning, that can be the result of trauma, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, being in an abusive relationship. There's a lot of different reasons that can cause that ADD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So social isolation is definitely something to notice. If you notice a student who normally was pretty talkative and friendly has kind of shut down, that is a red flag of having some mental health challenges. Changes in sleeping behavior. So if you have staff or students that are saying they're feeling incredibly tired or exhausted, that could be a sign of a mental health issue. Changes in eating. A sign of depression is either eating too much or not enough. Changes in sleep, same thing. Sometimes when people are depressed, they can't sleep. And sometimes when people are depressed, they experience hypersomnia. I had an older sister who one summer, when she came home from college, she seemed to me like she slept the whole summer because she was in a depressive state. So really being aware of these, of course, the intense fear of weight gain or concern with appearance might be a red flag of an eating disorder. Difficulty carrying out the tasks of daily living. Really important to have this on your radar. So substance abuse issues. 1 out of 10 of us has a problem with drugs or alcohol. And 1 out of 7 of us has a loved one with a problem with drugs or alcohol. So I don't think any of us is not impacted by substance abuse or addiction. And it's important to note that it's not just drugs and alcohol. In the younger generation, many kids are dealing with gaming addictions or internet addictions or gambling addictions, sex addiction. So there can be many of these process addictions in addition to drugs and alcohol. So these are some of the psychological and behavioral signs and symptoms of an addiction issue. So some of these can look like job performance issues, like they're inconsistent in their work. Maybe they're calling in sick a lot. Maybe there's a lot of tardiness. You notice that they look different. There's somebody who usually puts themselves together nicely and suddenly they're looking unshowered and wearing a hat and the same clothes they've been wearing, all week. These can be signs of mental health and addiction issues. People around who enable. So maybe you've got a younger student who's got a parent who's like a helicopter parent that's always, I know Johnny missed school this week, but he's, really going through something. So these can be sometimes relationships with loved ones where the loved one is dealing with codependency and unconsciously over functioning and enabling the person with the addiction issues. Having legal or financial issues, obviously like DUIs or they're getting tickets or fines because their house is not in order. They're not functioning in the way that they normally should be. This is a huge issue in the United States, and this is pre-pandemic data that over 10 million Americans deal with both a mental health and a substance abuse issue. So they're considered dually diagnosed. And it's really, again, a chicken and egg situation because sometimes people use drugs and alcohol because they feel depressed or anxious and they're trying to self-medicate. Other times people are dealing with a substance abuse issue and it causes depression or anxiety. So they really feed off of one another. What is really concerning from a mental health awareness perspective is that 50%, 49% of these 10.2 million Americans receive no treatment at all. So that's horrific. Of the people who do receive treatment, 38% are only getting mental health therapy or counseling, and they're not addressing their substance abuse issues at all, which is really concerning because they may not get well. I had a client who came to me years ago and he had been dealing with major depression for 12 years, had a bunch of different therapists and psychiatrists, and he came to me for a consultation, and I said, you know, I'd love to work with you. I'm not sure you're going to like what I have to say, but I really don't think that your depression is going to alleviate until you're willing to take a look at your relationship with alcohol. And of course, you may know what's the first thing that someone who has a problem with drugs or alcohol responds with. It's denial. So of course, he, you know, was telling me he doesn't have a problem. He was rationalizing, he was intellectualizing. And as his therapist, I had to kind of chip through some of that and encouraged him to try to moderate. And if he wasn't able to do that, we would talk about other choices. And a year later, he gave me his 1-year AA coin as a gift, as a thank you. And he said, Joyce, it's not that big of a deal. They accidentally gave me 2 at the meeting, but I keep it on my bookshelf because it's really meaningful to me that I've helped some folks get the proper treatment. You see that only 8% of these dually diagnosed folks receive both mental health and substance abuse treatment. So that's really important. When you are doing kind of interventions in the workplace, it's important that you help link people with professionals like myself who can determine the appropriate level of care. So when I worked at an EAP, it was really common for a supervisor to call in to say, I'm having an issue with an employee, they're having some workplace productivity challenges, and also I'm noticing that they smell of alcohol, or they call in sick, you know, the next day after a big football game. And so there's these signs that maybe there's a substance abuse issue. So a counselor would do an assessment and then let the person know what level of care they need and what type of care they need. So that is not your job, and I'll explain that some more. But very importantly, it is critical for you as leaders and for your other colleagues to have suicide awareness top of mind. In some of my global trainings, I presented for a company that had 1,200 employees, and that year they had 2 employees suicide. Horrific. And when I gave my mental health presentation for their employees, 2 employees shared that they were feeling suicidal in the polls during the presentation. And during the actual meeting, HR was able to connect with them and get them support and help and resources and work with them to help them be safe. So we have an ethical and moral responsibility as leaders to take care of our people. And so recognizing that suicide is a really big issue. And again, the rate of suicide or risk of suicide is greatest for those ages 18 to 24 during the pandemic. These are some of the signs, warning signs of suicide. So I want you to look at that list and, you know, memorize it, have it top of mind. My 16-year-old 6 months ago said to me, Mom, I just feel like I have no purpose, like my life has no purpose. She'd been isolated for 1.5 years, not seeing her friends, no dances, no sporting events, even learned driver's ed online. And when she said that, my therapist red flag went off, and I was like, oh my God, that could be a suicidal statement. And so I had to say to her, like, oh my goodness, honey, I'm, you know, really concerned. And are you having any thoughts about hurting yourself? You know, like a lot of kids are these days. And have you had thoughts of suicide? And you know, have you had a plan? And thankfully she hadn't. And I like a good therapist, I have her in therapy. I think it takes a village to raise children. And if you've got kids, I encourage you to encourage them to go to their school counselor or utilize your EAP or insurance mental health benefits. It's just better to err on the side of caution. So these are some of the warning signs. I know that this is a downer to talk about, but it is so important. One of my dear friends here in Chicago lost her brother to suicide, and she started a foundation, and I happened to connect her with another friend of mine who is a speaking coach. And it turned out a week after they met, my speaking coach friend lost her uncle by death by suicide. And so she was obviously horribly distraught and grieving, but also happy to have this new acquaintance of Amy who had been through it. So it is unfortunately impacting a lot of people right now. If you are experiencing suicidal thoughts or ideation, tell someone. I know it's scary. Just transcend the shame and stigma and just tell someone, I'm not doing great. I'm having some thoughts that are scaring me. I think I might need help. You can always call a suicide hotline. They're changing it to 988 soon, so that it's going to be like 911. I have clients who call that routinely. You just get connected with a professional counselor and you can talk and you know, until you feel safe and better, or they can help you get the appropriate care. If you have a student, a faculty member, or a loved one who is sharing with you, yes, I'm having suicidal thoughts and feelings. Yes, I have a plan. You need to get them to the local emergency room. So at the local emergency room, they have social workers who will do an assessment and determine if hospitalization would be helpful. Again, I believe err on the side of caution. I would far more rather have you over respond than under respond. I don't want anybody dealing with the guilt or horrible second guessing that comes with, you know, only if I had said something or done something, you know, if something horrible happens. So definitely don't minimize if somebody makes some serious statements to you. You know, you want to explore that. And I'm going to share with you, you know, how to have these conversations. And I know it's uncomfortable. You know, I'm a trained mental health professional, but even when I first started, it's awkward because I think we're socialized that it's not polite to sort of dig into people's problems, and it's their personal business, especially if they're a colleague or supervisee or a boss. I actually did a alcohol intervention on my own mentor. And it was really super stressful, and he was pissed off, but you know what? He got into treatment. He taught me a little too well, so it boomeranged back at him. These are some of the barriers to care. Shame and stigma, cost, time, racism, and the don't ask, don't tell mentality. 56% of adults with mental illness do not receive any treatment. So what's the impact of all of this on behavioral health in the workplace? Mental health and substance abuse issues that are not addressed lead to low productivity, poor team morale, absenteeism, turnover, accidents and injury, and healthcare costs. So addiction costs workplaces in the United States $500 billion a year in absenteeism, turnover, healthcare costs, and low productivity. Mental illness, serious mental illness like major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, they cost nearly $200 billion per year. So really important issues. If you want to understand how behavioral and health issues impact your workplace or your learning environment, you can click on these links and it will gather some information about your industry and location and the number of people involved, and it'll let you know a dollar amount. And that can be useful if you are in a position where you're asking for some mental health training and programming or services, because actually investing in that will save your organization money, even though it is an investment. So promoting mental fitness as a supervisor means that you are going to promote work-life balance for your students and your staff because you recognize that's an important aspect of mental health. So you are going to encourage them to take care of themselves, to set healthy limits and boundaries with work, to access support. you're going to set realistic performance expectations. I was asked to present for a financial organization on work-life balance, and they said, you can say anything that you want, but don't tell them to work less, because we need them to work 80 to 100 hours per week. I mean, come on. That is not realistic. That is not healthy. So you want to collaborate with HR. If you have HR within your organization, you want to talk with them about these types of issues and use them as a support resource and sounding board. You want to create a collaborative and positive team environment that has psychological safety. Psychological safety is when people feel like they can share that they're going through difficulty with their supervisors without fear of retaliation, of punishment, of getting a lower grade, or getting, fired even. And you want to reduce stigma at work. So making sure that your faculty and your newsletters and everything speak in a way that acknowledges that these are tough times, people are experiencing mental health issues, that is completely normal, no shame, no stigma. And, some people even share what they've been through. One CEO of one company that I gave some presentations for shared that he dealt with depression several years ago and how helpful treatment was for him. I had one guy who was really kind of a guy's guy at AT&T, and he talked about his own therapy and how much it helped him. And the more people do that, the more it removes shame and stigma. So mental health first aid is basically, applying first aid techniques to mental health issues. So this is something that mental health first aid programming is something that people are doing in workplaces across the country. And it gives you the tools to identify these issues and be the bridge to getting people care. So it's not, instead of them getting care, you're not expected to be a therapist or counselor, but it is really helping you identify and be the bridge. So mental health issues are common. People often don't seek help on their own. Some people are uninformed about mental health issues. Sometimes there are cultural barriers. Some people maybe grew up in cultural or religious backgrounds where mental health wasn't considered to be a real thing, or that treatment isn't considered to be effective, or that mental health is some sort of weakness, all of which, those are myths that lead to people not getting the care that they need. So applying mental health in the workplace, I want to share with you a poll because I want to hear from you. What kinds of mental health issues are you seeing in your workplace environments? And we can include students with that too. What of these issues are you seeing most of? So thank you for participating in that. And while you participate with that, I'm going to continue kind of moving through this presentation. All right, so let's say that you have a student or a staff member and you're having some concerns about their mental health and well-being. If it is not an imminent risk or urgent matter, take a moment to consult with HR or to consult with another supervisor or with your employee assistance program if your organization offers one to employees. Because your EAP would offer counselors who could share with you, some tips on how to respond. So I'm sharing the results of this poll. There we go. So everybody's burnt out and overwhelmed. Holy cow, 100%. Yeah, 54 depression and lots of anxiety, some substance abuse, and anger management or aggressive behavior. And anger management and aggressive behavior can be the response to all of those other things above there. It can also be a response to trauma. So, wow, I can't imagine what you must be dealing with. That's a tremendous amount to be dealing with. So I'm really glad that you've taken time for this presentation. And I want to make sure to share with you the remainder of the resources. So you also want, before having a conversation about mental health with someone, or if you've got somebody who's having some anger management issues, one of the most important things that you can do is stay calm and grounded. So connect with your breath, get in your body, de-escalate yourself, unhook from them, be present and be mindful of what's going on. You want to shut off distractions. So if you have a conversation about mental health with somebody, we don't want your email alerts going off or your phone going off or anything disruptive. This is a really personal and important conversation. You want to make sure to have these conversations in a confidential environment, and also one where you feel safe. So if you are concerned, if you're talking to an employee about a substance abuse issue or their anger management issue, you're going to want to have maybe another person in the room with you. You may want to leave the door cracked open. You may want to be sitting closer to the door than they are in the event that they get escalated and you need to leave. You want to plan adequate time for these conversations, because a lot of times when you open the door for people to talk about their mental health, they really do want to share. And so they may want to open up and share with you what's been going on for them, which may lead to some tears or some emoting. And I know that that can be, stressful or uncomfortable or sad to deal with, but it is just really kind and ethical and really critical for you as leaders to develop these skills for your staff and students. You also want to be mindful of your facial expressions and tone of voice, making sure that you are not shaming them or stigmatizing them inadvertently in any way, that you are showing kindness and compassion and openness is extremely important. So you want to assess for risk of harm. So if somebody shares with you that they're feeling depressed or that they're going through a hard time, you may want to ask them, have you had any thoughts about hurting yourself or hurting somebody else? Do you feel safe at home? You want to listen to them non-judgmentally. So making sure that you're not sort of imposing your own biases, or you certainly don't want to minimize or invalidate. So to say, oh, that's not that big of a deal, or don't let that bother you, or don't get mad about that, that's kind of placing your own value system on their personal problem, and you're a different person with different history and different coping skills. So instead, really stick to being empathic, really acknowledging how they're feeling, even if maybe you disagree with it. You can still say, wow, I hear you that you're really upset and you're really distraught. You're feeling really alone in this situation. It must be really overwhelming and scary for you. And I'm here to help. I'm going to give you some resources and some support, and we will get you with people who can help you feel better so that you can succeed in your program here or in your job here. You want to give people the resources to get the professional help that they need. You also want to empower them to access self-help resources or support groups or other wellness programs that might help them do better. So when we are empathic and compassionate, we don't assume that we know what other people are thinking. And we ask open-ended questions like, tell me about how you're doing. Instead of, are you having problems at home? You want to say like, tell me how things have been for you personally. What's going on. You want to really listen with your eyes, with your face, with your body language. You want to be present. You can use reflective listening to show that you're hearing and understanding. And again, just acknowledging the feelings people just really need to be heard. They need to be heard and understood. When I give surveys across the country, most people are saying they need more emotional support. So we need to learn as leaders how to provide some of that in an appropriate way in the workplace. So 4 steps for you for providing support. It's important for you to say something. If you have a concern about an employee or a student, you want to approach them and in a way that is kind and compassionate and authentic. You want to state with them what you're noticing. I'm going to share with you some videos in a bit that you can watch on your own time that are wonderful examples of how to have these conversations, because I know that they're challenging and they can be intimidating. You want to listen without judgment. So, again, without criticizing them in any way. You want to give resources and information. And again, I have that both a video and an article that you could share with your coworkers on how to facilitate a referral for counseling. You want to pay attention to your own language. So you want to ask, like, what happened, or how are you feeling, rather than like, what's wrong with you? You want to say, it's understandable that you're feeling overwhelmed, rather than, don't feel that way. You want to, these are some of the possible questions that you could ask if you were concerned that somebody was dealing with suicidal thoughts or feelings. And again, I'm not expecting you to be a counselor or therapist. You may not feel entirely comfortable with this. Maybe you've got another coworker or colleague who is more comfortable with this, who you could invite in to be a support as you have this conversation with someone. But each of these factors is something that puts an individual at higher risk of suicide. So for every one of these, if they say yes, then you need to be even more concerned than you were previously. So, if someone says, yeah, I've had thoughts about hurting myself, but I would never do it. I don't have a plan. I've never had previous attempts. I haven't had a mental health history. I don't use drugs or alcohol. That's going to be different than if someone's like, yeah, I've been hospitalized twice before for suicide attempts and I own a gun. And my plan is to shoot myself. Obviously, that is imminent risk. So these questions need to be asked. I know for me, sometimes I feel like I'm implying the person is crazy, or at least I felt that way early in my practice. I almost felt bad asking, like, have you had thoughts of hurting yourself or someone else? But if you say it in a way that is just like, hey, these are really challenging times and you're going through a lot, and, have you had any thoughts about hurting yourself or anybody else? You'll be surprised how candid people are, because many of them really do want help and do want to tell someone. But it's hard to find the words and know how. So the biggest takeaway that I want to say to you is, don't wait till it gets worse, and don't wait until it's too late. Nip these issues in the bud, act swiftly. Don't go into denial, or don't minimize it, or think that magically these issues are going to resolve themselves. You want to express that you care. You care about this person, you care about their mental well-being and safety. When you're acknowledging issues, like if you said to someone, I noticed that you've been absent from work a lot, you haven't really seemed like yourself, you seem more withdrawn, there have been more errors in your work or late work, and I'm concerned, is something going on for you? And do you think that perhaps you're dealing with a mental health issue? So it's not your job to diagnose, nor should you. So you don't need to say to someone, I think you have ADD, or I think you are depressed. You can just say, hey, we had this training. I learned some of the common signs of mental health issues. I think we're all having mental health issues at this time, and help is available. And I want to talk with you about that and be a support and resource for you. You do want to keep documentation. If you've had these conversations, or you're noticing these issues, you want to keep documentation, because You could let a student go or a staff member go because of performance issues, but mental health issues are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so you want to keep documentation factual, objective, and clear, and focus on performance issues if you are looking to, make a change in someone's employment status, or if you are looking to place a referral, acknowledge that you had a conversation with them. You gave them resources and referrals for counseling, including the Employee Assistance Program. And importantly, you want to respect the privacy and confidentiality of the people that you've had these conversations with. You should never be the only person that knows that someone's having suicidal ideation. You immediately should alert family, have them contact family, get them help and resources. But other than that, if someone shares that they're going through a divorce or something, it wouldn't be appropriate to kind of gossip about that in the lunchroom with other colleagues. That's not their business. And word gets around fast, and then people won't feel safe coming forward if they are having mental health issues. So taking that really seriously. If you have an EAP, and 80% of employers have an EAP, and even if your school or workplace does not have an EAP benefit, you can alert your staff member because maybe they live with somebody who does have an EAP benefit. And even if they're not on that person's insurance, they would be eligible for those EAP benefits. And again, the EAP will determine the level of care, whether they need to go in a hospital or a day treatment program or an intensive outpatient program or just go see a counselor or therapist, and they will provide the referrals. If somebody just wanted to access a therapist, Psychology Today is like Match.com for finding a therapist. It has our photos, our bios, our profiles, our areas of specialty, our prices, office locations. Although now with telehealth, as long as the therapist is licensed in the state where the client is, they can provide services over video conferencing. So lots and lots of resources available with the EAP. And again, in imminent risk, call 911. You do have a duty to warn if somebody says, I'm going to go kill my wife. You need to call the police, and you need to alert family member, and you need to document that. And your attempts, and certainly consult HR. If you have an EAP, they offer other support and resources that could help your faculty with mental health issues. So they offer critical incident stress debriefings. So if you did, God forbid, have an accident, injury, or death in your organization, they can send counselors to do debriefings to help your staff cope. They can offer mental health trainings and seminars and workplace wellness events. They can provide, drug-free workplace programming. So really making sure that you're looking into those roles. Suggestions for supervisors and leaders. The best thing you could do is take care of your own mental health and be a good example for others. Be aware of your emotional intelligence. Having these conversations requires self-awareness and compassion and effective communication and conflict resolution. And those are all skills that we can practice and develop. We want to have healthy boundaries with our faculty and students. It's not your role to save them or to be their therapist or overly responsible. So you want to have boundaries that are permeable enough that you can have these conversations with folks, but you don't want to have to become overly involved. So really important to get consultation and support if you're dealing with some of these issues with your staff. This slide shows you what are your responsibilities and what are not your responsibilities. It is, if you recommend treatment to someone and they drop out and they relapse, that is not your fault. That is not your responsibility. But your responsibilities are to do interventions, provide education and resources, and know your workplace policies when it comes to mental health issues in the workplace. Stigma, being mindful of stigma. and addressing that in the workplace. Recognizing that sometimes stigma is gender-based. In general, I think it's harder for men to seek counseling because there have been so many messages socially, to just kind of man up and be independent, and getting help is a sign of weakness. And none of that is helpful. None of that is helpful or useful. So we want to move past those barriers and recognize we all have mental health issues as part of the human condition, and we all are genetically wired to respond to stress differently. You want to stomp out stigma by making sure that your staff aren't using words like crazy or psycho. I had a bipolar client who her priest referred to, he said something about crazy bipolar people. And she was deeply upset and deeply hurt because she was just going to share with him about her struggles with the disorder. But she's so high functioning, I don't think anyone would ever imagine that she deals with these issues. So just making sure that you pay attention to language, recognizing a lot of people are in recovery from addiction and they may not share that. So if people are talking disparagingly about alcoholics or addicts or things like that, you just don't know what people are dealing with at home. So being mindful of language and avoiding those negative terms. I love mental health heroes in the media when celebrities come forward, and here we've got some athletes. Michael Phelps talks openly about his battle with depression. We have Naomi Osaka, who talked about her anxiety, and recently Simone Biles talking about her anxiety as well as history of sexual abuse and trauma. And these are beautiful, talented, enormously successful, high-functioning individuals. And when people like this come forward and share that they have mental health struggles, it's really normalizing for people who are struggling in silence. These are some resources for you if you're working on reducing stigma at work. The National Alliance on Mental Illness has a bunch of cool campaigns. They have a social media campaign, #CureStigma. They have a public service announcement you could use in your newsletters. They have signs that you can print out on mental health infographics, or you could include those in newsletters. You want to teach leaders in your organizations not to use these types of terms because they work against people coming forward talking about mental health so that they can get help. That's part of creating a collaborative culture. These are some resources, and again, these are all clickable links. So if you download these slides, you will have these links for future programming. So companies like Johnson & Johnson offer a mental health diplomats program. That's something that you could set up in your workplace where coworkers are designated diplomats who others can come to if they're dealing with personal issues and want some help within the workplace. Doing events like the National Alliance on Mental Illness has walks for fundraising events, and many companies do that together. And it's a message to show that you care. Teaching your supervisors to have open and honest conversations about workload, about morale, having 360 reviews. In my book, I have a workplace satisfaction exercise and a self-care satisfaction exercise and a support network exercise. These are all resources that you could download and use for your wellness programming in your organizations. You want to work on teaching your staff empathy and having that collaborative message. Many companies are beefing up their mental health resources. There are corporate subscriptions to apps like Ginger that have free 24/7 counseling with a therapist or psychiatrist. That's great if your school does not provide any therapy or counseling. While is another similar program. Apps like Calm and Headspace offer corporate and educational subscriptions at a discount that help with mindfulness in the workplace programming, which has become enormously popular. I've facilitated it for organizations like Boeing and AT&T. I realize I have a lot of slides here, so I want you to please feel free to put any questions in the box, and I'm just going to kind of move through these next several slides, and then I'll happily answer any questions that you have. But having mindfulness in the workplace programming, which would include having a meditation room, having someone from the community give a yoga class once a month, leading a meeting with a short meditation. The research shows that having mindfulness in the workplace programming has all of the benefits on the left of this slide and reduces all of the problems on the right. So definitely something to look into. If you need free counseling resources for students or faculty, this slide has free resources. United Healthcare has a 24/7 counseling line that anybody can use. If your students feel more comfortable texting, they can text with a crisis counselor. I have the Suicide National Hotline there. You could post these in break rooms or on your website or portals for staff or students. Find a mental health facility near you. Gives links to local community mental health centers that accept public aid and offer services at a sliding fee or pro bono basis. There are some other links here for some other resources and organizations that you could follow on social media and share their posts in your organizations. These are some videos and resources that I definitely recommend that you check out from Mental Health First Aid, from the American Psychiatric Association. And these are those videos, if you wanted to watch some of these with your leaders in your organization on how to get comfortable talking about mental health in the workplace and why that's important, definitely look into those. I believe it was Sarah's story that was my favorite one, really a nice example. Some other articles that might be good for you. I also encourage you to revisit your substance abuse policy or drug-free workplace program policy. I'm shameless plug for my book. I sold it at the Chicago conference and got to sign a lot of copies. Tons of proven tools and practical tips from psychology to help your faculty and your students promote their positive mental health and also financial health if they're interested in that. And that is available on Amazon and Audible. It is the Financial Mindset Fix. This is my social media. Again, here's the QR code for that landing page with all of the resources. If you didn't have a chance to answer a question today, feel free to email me or let me know how I can be a support and a resource to you. I'm so happy that I've gotten several speaking engagements through C-SPEN, so let me know if I can speak for your organization and if that would be helpful. So now I'm just going to look and maybe Jerry, you could come back on and we can see if there are any questions. I am not seeing any questions, which is absolutely fine. So just let me know if I can be a help to you in any way. And I thank you for your time and your attention today. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and stop sharing my camera. Oh, thank you. Some nice thank yous in the comment box. Really appreciate it. Yay.